Good afternoon, all. Thank you for attending this exciting session on translation. This session is all about how we get our discoveries out of the lab and to the clinic, into the hands of patients and doctors and into companies. My name is Ellen Roach. I'm an associate professor in mechanical engineering and the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science, and I have the privilege of chairing today's session. We are so lucky to have four distinguished speakers today who will speak to us about different aspects of translating their science and technologies. I could listen to these speakers for hours, but we have a short amount of time, so I'll introduce everyone at a high level now and keep the talks moving afterwards. So first we have Professor Andrew Lowe. Professor Lowe is the Charles E. and Susan T. Harris Professor of Finance at Sloan and the Director of the Laboratory for Financial Engineering. Professor Lowe will speak with us about financing translation, describing the inflection point of biomedicine and proposing new business models to translate technology. Next, we'll hear about translation through multiple startups in the area of nanomedicine. Professor Sangeeta Bhatia is a John J. and Dorothy Wilson Professor of Health Sciences and Technology and Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. She is a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator and directs the Marble Center for Cancer and Nanomedicine. Professor Bhatia will speak to us about translating nanomedicine technologies for cancer detection and describe her prolific co-founder timeline in translating technology out of her lab. She will then describe how she supports other faculty in translating their technology and the incredible impact and success of the Faculty Founder Initiative she has created. Professor Hugh Herr will speak next. Professor Herr is a professor of media arts and sciences at MIT Media Lab and the co-director of the K. Lisa Yang Center for Bionics. Professor Herr's work melds human physiology and electromechanics to produce systems that emulate human biomechanics, improving mobility for those with paralysis and limb loss. He will speak about how he has translated technology from the biomechatronics lab to enhance human physical capability through for-profit and non-profit mechanisms. Finally, Professor Alex Shalik will speak to us about engineering our biomedical ecosystem for global impact. Professor Shalik is the J.W. Kiekeffer Professor in the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science and the Department of Chemistry. He is also a member of the Broad Institute, the Koch Institute, and the Raygon Institute, and the Director of the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science. Alex will describe how his group develop and apply tools to understand balance in tissue ecosystems. He'll describe the opportunities at MIT for translation, how we can engineer the right solutions to key problems, leveraging global partners to scale, and addressing systemic challenges. He will conclude the session describing how this is achieved through broad collaboration, which will create a natural segue into the next session. I do hope you enjoy these talks and you are inspired by them. I thank the speakers in advance for sharing examples of their work and for imparting their wisdom and philosophies on biomedical translation. Thank you.
So I'd like to start by thanking Ellen for that generous introduction and for chairing the session, and President Kornbluth for putting together this event. Thank you all for being here as well. I'm a financial economist by training and trade, and you might be wondering, who ordered that? What am I doing here in an event of otherwise serious scientists, clinicians, and biopharma leaders? Well, no matter what field you're in, no matter what you're doing, no matter what your goals are, at some point or another, if you're looking to affect patient lives, you will need money. And that means you'll be speaking my language. So what I'm going to be talking about is how we engage in the financing of translational medicine. And to begin, clearly we are at a biomedical inflection point. And I'll give you two illustrations of that. The first comes from my world of finance. This is a chart of the 30 best-selling drugs in the year 2000. I'm sure you can't see the specific drugs, but highlighted in blue are those drugs that came out of academia or biotech. 4. 26 out of the top 30 came out of big pharma, and in the good old days, that's how translation occurred, really through big pharma efforts. Fast forward 18 years to 2018, and now here are the 30 best-selling drugs in that year. Highlighted in blue are those that came out of biotech and academia. 24 of the top 30, 9 out of the top 10. Medicine has changed. The second way we know that biomedical advances are at an inflection point is because my MIT colleagues told me so. In particular, Susan Hockfield, Tyler Jackson, Phil Sharp in 2016 published a report titled Convergence, the convergence of the life sciences, physical sciences, and engineering. All of the different fields are coming together to produce remarkable advances for medicine. And the insiders in this industry call it the omics revolution. Every one of these omics has experienced tremendous advances over the last even 5 years, never mind 10 or 20, with the exception of one. There's been one omics that's been a bottleneck to progress, and that is economics. Because we got to pay for this stuff, and the business models that we're using are still tied to the past and haven't really taken into account all of the innovation that's going on. So I want to talk to you about that omics, economics, and in particular, describe how translation occurs at a high level, at a caricature from my perspective as an economist. So what is the life cycle of biomedical innovation? Well, it begins here in the laboratory with the researcher and an idea. And that idea sparks, usually, a collaboration of additional experts that come together to take that idea, round it out, put it into various different tests, experiments we call them, and ultimately, when all is said and done, and you collect the data, and you've got the results, and it looks like you've got something that might one day help a patient, what do? You publish a paper, right? Wrong. Do not do that. What you are supposed to do, and it's remarkable how many life scientists aren't aware of this, you file a patent disclosure, after which you are totally free to publish your paper. And this is important because while many people think that filing a patent is somehow dirty and too commercial and pecuniary and you're getting involved in the world of money, what you're doing is reserving the right for somebody else, typically an investor, to basically benefit, get a rate of return for deploying capital to take that idea and translate it into medicine. So after you publish the paper, do some more experiments, you're able to now demonstrate, perhaps in animals, that maybe this actually might turn into a drug. And so at that point, you're able to get your patent, be able to create a company, perhaps rent some space at Lab Central, and then ultimately start going through the very long and important process of clinical testing, at the end of which you might, if you're lucky, get a drug. But more often than not, you will fail. And that, in a nutshell, is what translation is all about. What makes this process very challenging is that you need money every step of the way, and if that money is interrupted for any reason, then the whole thing pretty much ends. Biomedical innovation is binary, and that kind of risk is something that most investors are simply not able to withstand. So we need better ways of financing translational medicine. And that's what I would like to talk to you about today. Here's an idea. Instead of developing drugs one at a time, why not pool these various different drugs into a portfolio, maybe even across universities? Imagine, for example, a business model that looks like this, where on the left-hand side, you've got multiple universities pooling their intellectual property to create a vehicle that investors can participate in. Why multiple universities? Well, because MIT can't do everything, and so we have to leave room for some other folks. the bottom line is that we don't know where the next breakthrough is going to come from because of the complexity of the life sciences. And so we want to be able to have multiple shots on goal, even beyond a single university. But if we can construct that portfolio, manage it, create programs around the most promising ideas, not necessarily requiring faculty to give up tenure and become CEOs when they really don't want to do that and they want to do their research and let other folks who are ideally suited to manage the businesses grow that business. That's really what we're talking about. With this kind of business model, all of the various different stakeholders will get what they want and they will be able to contribute what they can. What do we call this business model? Well, I call it tech transferase. And for those of you who are laughing, you are critical for the success of this business model. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sangeeta. I'm trained as a physician and an engineer, and I'm going to tell you a story, a case study really, that came out of my lab in the field of nanomedicine, and use it to illustrate how you can translate through startups in the way Andrew described, and how it helps to advance things to patients, but also how it can drive the next generation of innovation here at MIT. And then I'll close with some ideas about how we hope to enable more faculty to do this in this next chapter that MIT is embarking on. So to begin, I want to tell you what nanomedicine is. It's nanotechnology applied to medicine. And nanotechnology itself is a field of materials that are smaller than 100 nanometers. Human hair is 100 microns, so this is 1,000 times smaller. Now, this is a field with two origin stories. On the left, you see microchips, semiconductor fabrication. These drive all of your smartphones, and you may know the new NVIDIA chip has feature sizes of 4 nanometers. So using what we call top-down fabrication, we can make very teeny tiny things. The other origin story comes from the world of chemistry. On the right, what you see are quantum dots. These are when you assemble nanomaterials by collecting atoms and creating emergent properties. And this is an example of quantum dots, something that Muji Bawendi shared the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year here at MIT. And these materials are really cool. They're exactly the same composition, but they glow different colors simply based on their size. So there's a whole world of material science and physics happening at the nanoscale, where properties, electronic, magnetic, optical, emerge when you make them small. And what's really exciting in this moment is that if you think about what that does for medicine, it turns out there's also biological properties at this length scale. And if you think hard about it, it's not surprising that this is the case, because if you look at this molecular ruler, actually the nanoscale is the scale at which biology communicates. DNA is 2 nanometers in width. A receptor is 10 nanometers in size. A virus is 100 nanometers, right? So that is the scale that all of the interesting things are happening. And in fact, the field has made many, many nanomaterials that have been in clinical trials and in humans. In fact, many of you got one of these nanomaterials. The lipid nanoparticle on the top there was the encapsulation for the mRNA vaccine, both of the mRNA vaccines for COVID. So these materials have now been in millions of people and been proven to be safe. And as a community, over about 20 years now around the world, people have been working in nanomedicine and discovering what is the biology of the nanoscale. And I'm not going to go through everything on the right, but just to say that we're finding out all kinds of things about the size and shape of a material, dictating how it interacts with the human body. So in my lab, what we've been doing is trying to think about what could this do for cancer. Now, cancer is a disease that you know could be really best treated if we could find it early. And some cancers, unfortunately, can grow for 8 to 10 years before being detected even by the best screening technologies that we have today. So we had the idea, what if we can make a machine that can travel through the bloodstream, look for cancer, and when it finds it, report it to the outside world. This is how the machine works. So here you see a 100 nanometer particle. It's circulating in the bloodstream. and it's going to leak out into the surrounding tissue, which is a tumor. Once it's inside the tumor, it's designed to detect enzymes that tumors make. Those of you who are biologists, these are proteases. They're depicted here in yellow. And these enzymes can activate these materials. Because it's a catalytic reaction, each enzyme can release 1,000 reporters. So this is an amplification. And those reporters are now even tinier than the first material. These are about 3 nanometers in size. So when they get back in the bloodstream, now they are small enough to be filtered and concentrated 20-fold by the kidney into the urine. So this starts out as a shot, and an hour later, you collect something in the urine that is 20,000-fold amplified for every copy of an enzyme. So we've been working on this in the lab. The first paper was published in 2013. We started a company called Glimpse Bio, like get a glimpse inside the body. And we did exactly what Andrew directed us to do. We first filed the patent, then raised the capital. I co-founded it with my postdoc, Gabe Kwong, who's now a full professor at Georgia Tech. And that company did things at a scale with dedicated teams that we couldn't do here at MIT. We did scale-up manufacturing. We went to the FDA. We did 2-species toxicology. We did human clinical trials. And now they're on their way in liver cancer, trying to show that this could work to find liver tumors in patients that have advanced fibrotic disease. So that's been very exciting. That's been happening outside of campus since 2015. But what's exciting about this is that the students in the lab now are unlocked. They can see that this can happen. There's a path to patients, and they get more innovative. And so what did they start thinking about? Well, what if you could make a urine test like a pregnancy test? What if it could be on paper, and you could read out a cancer test at the point of care? So we invented that. What if you were interested in lung cancer? You could breathe out like a breathalyzer in 10 minutes. So we invented that. What if you could find out where the tumor was and if it had spread? So we invented a version like that. And what if you could use AI to design these materials by design instead of creating libraries like we used to? So we're about to publish a paper with Microsoft on that. So there's all kinds of things that the translation into the company then fed back into MIT. Finally, we have physicians in the labs, not just engineers, and they decided that this would be good not just for cancer, but for something that maybe surprised all of you, pediatric pneumonia. When you have a child in the ER that has pneumonia, the best thing to know is, do they need antibiotics or not? Is it bacterial or is it viral? So we're working on a breath test to be able to detect that in 10 minutes with foundation support. And this whole field now has a lot of investment coming in from places like ARPA-H. So the innovation is keeping going by virtue of having done the startup company. So Glimpse here I started in 2015. I want to just say that MIT is an incredible place to start companies. And as an academic entrepreneur, you learn as you go. This is a muscle. You can see that my entrepreneurial journey accelerated over time. And I feel very lucky to be here, not just geographically, but with colleagues like Bob Langer and Phil Sharp, who gave their time and their wisdom and advice about how to stay a professor and be an entrepreneur. Now, I will say that in this next chapter of MIT, I hope we can do even more. And that's because as I did this, I found that very few of my women colleagues had a foot in both worlds. And in fact, MIT is an incredible place to make that observation because we really have a playbook for how to handle gender disparities, which are documented in this amazing book if you haven't read it. The playbook is make a team of people to address the problem, gather the data, which we did, find institutional champions like Anantha Chandrakesan and Maria Zuber and now Sally, and talk about what addressing this gap would address. So we've been doing that. Finally, do experiments. And so we have the Faculty Founder Initiative started. It's just celebrated its 3-year birthday. And I'm happy to tell any of you who want to learn more about it how we've been helping these 21 amazing faculty unlock their own inventions. 19 of them are now building startups. And we hope that all of them become serial entrepreneurs in this next chapter. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Hugh Herr, and here you see my beautiful legs. From the knee down, I'm a bunch of nuts and bolts. 3 computers the size of your thumbnail, 6 sensors, a muscle tendon-like actuator. These devices propel me as I walk, and I'm actually able to walk in a normal fashion. Years ago, I founded a company called Bionics Medical Technologies that translated the prostheses outside of MIT. Today, they've been fit to tens of thousands of people, many wounded US soldiers as well. At the new K. Lisa Yang Center for Bionics here at MIT, we're taking the next step, pun intended. The legs that I'm wearing are intrinsically controlled. They're not connected to my brain, so there's algorithms running on chip. So what we want to do is actually link the next generation of prostheses to the brain, to the spinal cord and central brain via muscles and tendons. So we're actually not only manipulating bone and soft tissues and surgical designs, but we're actually putting hardware inside the body. This is an osseointegrated prosthesis where there's a titanium shaft going through the skin membrane into the residual limb bone. It's a mechanical anchoring point, and as you can see, you see an electrical connector where we can pass 16 fine wire leads from computers on the external limb to, for example, electrodes inside the body and bidirectionally singled. So this is not a wireless approach, it's a wired approach. We recently got a paper published in Nature Medicine a few months ago. This is the first bionic limb that's completely controlled by the brain that restores natural movement gait. So all these movements that you see, all the nuance of movements that occur biomechanically when a person goes up and down steps are being mediated through the electromechanics. So we're also applying our techniques to the upper extremity. Sorry, let me go back. Tricky. Oh, let me try once more. Doesn't quite work. There we go. This is a box and blocks demonstration. The task is how many blocks can this person put in the box in 60 seconds. So we currently have the record with our neural interfacing technologies. We're not only doing brain-controlled limbs, but we're also closing the loop where we reflect proprioception, the sense of position, movement, and load, and cutaneous signals, the sense of touch, from the prosthesis back into the nervous system. This is a first human subject that received a cutaneous interface design put forth by my group called the Cutaneous Mechano-Neural Interface. Basically, surgically, we took, when her limb was amputated, we took skin from the bottom of the foot, and we put that skin inside her amputated residuum, wrapped a muscle around it, and then we're actuating that muscle via computer, via the 16 fine wire leads. This video was shot immediately after we stimulated the constructs, and this is her response.
So fascinating. This is just so different from everything else I've been feeling the last day and a half.
Okay, so this is definitely not residual limb like muscle stimulation, like this is pure phantom limb sensation.
I'm not feeling anything in my limb at all.
That was wonderful. Obviously, the constructs are physically in her residuum. She didn't feel anything there. She actually felt the bottom of her foot that's no longer there. So obviously, we're going to put one of these devices on her, put pressure sensing that senses pressures as she walks, and then reflect that into her nervous system so she can feel the ground. So that's the neural interfacing the prosthetic part, there's a startup company called Muscle Metrics that's being launched outside of MIT. This is a technology that's an exoskeleton. It's a bionic shoe, kind of like an e-bike for legs that augments walking, running, and jumping. This is a company I co-founded called Defy that's not only focused on rehabilitation, but human augmentation, extending capability beyond nature. So we're using this platform today to also address medical needs. So using small magnetic spheres into weak muscle in the calf, for example, after a stroke, and using magnetic arrays on the skin, we can track weak muscle dynamics and then reflect those to control a motorized exoskeleton to augment strength. So I think we'd be very remiss if the only thing we did here at MIT is expand the boundaries of technology. Sadly, there's so many areas of the world that do not have access to prosthetics and orthotics. Arguably, the area of the world with the greatest need is in Western Africa and Sierra Leone. As many of you know, there's a civil war there that ended in 2002, where rebel forces hacked off limbs with machetes. Now there's tens of thousands of people with limb loss. So as part of the K. Lisa Yang Center for Bionics here at MIT, we're actually building a prosthetic and orthotic sector in this war-torn nation. What is our goal? Sustainable care and delivery of orthotics and prosthetic services in Sierra Leone. We want to increase annual production of prostheses by an order of magnitude. Our approach we call SITE, an acronym that stands for Supply Chain Infrastructure, Technology, and Education. We feel only by having results in all four pillars can we introduce sustainable change. We're 3 years into our program, and we're experiencing tremendous success. We have many glorious stories. I'll end with one such story. This is Mohammed Ba. Like tens of thousands of other citizens of Sierra Leone, he lost his limb in the Civil War. As a young man, the rebel forces were attacking his village, and he ran, and he stepped on a landmine and lost his limb. We just fit a prosthesis to him. Now he can walk freely for the first time without crutches or canes. He's passionate about soccer, and he can freely be seen on the soccer field enjoying his favorite game. So just to finish up, restoring quality of life and independence of living for people with physical disability is, I believe, a moral imperative. Disability experienced by a friend or family member is so common that we just view it as part of the human condition, but it doesn't have to be that way. A great narrative in this 21st century will be the emergence of humans with technology, resulting in the mitigation of disability and unleashing humanity's greatest potential. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and I definitely don't have any videos that are quite that cool. What I was hoping to talk about today was, what I really think today's event is all about, which is the opportunity to come together to really engineer our entire ecosystem to have global impact, as was very beautifully illustrated by the talks that just occurred from Sangeeta and Hugh, but also from many of the ones that came earlier this morning. So before I begin, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about what we do within our lab. And fundamentally, what our lab is interested in is this idea of homeostasis in tissues. Now at MIT, I teach 560, which is thermodynamics, for those of you that haven't had to take it. And as a chemistry professor, if you gave me a pressure and a temperature, I could tell you what equilibrium is for any given reaction. But if you asked me what balance is in a tissue, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I can't tell you what that means molecularly or cellularly, but I know it's important. Because if I get too much of an immune response, I can get tissue damage and death, like I might see in an autoimmune condition. Or if I have too little, I can become susceptible to opportunistic infections or the outgrowth of tumors. So a lot of what we try and do within the lab is to understand, through studying different human contexts, what is it that defines health? What are the deviations that are induced by exposure to environmental perturbations like pathogens or pollutants? And how could we rebalance the system therapeutically or prophylactically buffer it through something like a vaccine in the first place? And the reason that it's such a good time to think about these sorts of questions is that we can now develop tools that will let us study these cellular ecosystems at incredible resolution. So just to give you a sense of what is now possible, because it seems relatively science fiction-like, we can take a very small amount of cells, so 50,000 cells, 20,000 cells, the kinds of things that you would have in fluids that you might not even be aware. So imagine scraping the inside of your cheek. Now, rather than saying that's too few, we can actually load them into innovative technologies, many of the ones that you've seen earlier that rely upon things like microfluidics and new chemical capture reagents. And with these, we can actually measure not one thing or two things, but look at 20,000 plus variables at a time. So really get a comprehensive view of everything that's happening in every cell. And this gives us the kinds of big data that Caroline was talking about earlier, where we can actually get 1 trillion data points just from one individual sample. And so just to make this a little bit more real, what you can do is you can take a tissue like the retina, where it has this beautiful multi-layered structure, and you can see there's multiple different cell types, but we don't really know what the components are. We don't know what their markers are. We can load it into one of these devices, and for each cell, we can measure thousands of different genes. And here I'm showing you expression of a gene being high as white, black means off. What we can then do is we can take a set of cells that express the same kind of programming, and this we think might be a specific cell type. We can take one of those markers, go back and label it using standard molecular biology approaches, and characterize it in situ. And so what this does is it takes us from a place where it would have taken us 30 years to identify a cell type, its markers, and characterize it, but now do it in a week. But what's so impressive is that we don't just do this one cell type at a time. Instead, we can look at every single cell type that's up here. So we're not compressing 30 years of research into a week. We're compressing hundreds of years of research into a single week. So when you look at something like this, you can easily imagine why I had to be at MIT as a professor and was lucky when I had the opportunity. It's because I need incredible multidisciplinary scientists that are chemists, that are engineers, that really understand how to apply this to different contexts, that can analyze the resulting data. But it wasn't just MIT. It was really that I needed to be embedded in this incredible ecosystem that you're all part of. If, as you probably all know from Phil's talk this morning, MIT is surrounded by this incredible community of biotechs, of other institutions, of hospitals, of academic medical centers. And what this does is it creates an incredible ecosystem in which to innovate. And that's because, like Colin said earlier, the most important question when you engineer is why. And I interpret that a little bit differently. I think about that as exploring. And what I mean by that is really taking advantage of this incredible ecosystem and its willingness to collaborate, to go talk to people to identify problems that matter. So for example, by talking to Sarah Fortune over at the Harvard School of Public Health, she said, well, that's great. Have you ever thought about applying it to something like tuberculosis, which you heard about from Brian this morning? Brian said 4,000 people a day. It's 1.6 million people a year. So that's more than any other infectious disease except for 1 year in COVID. And this is literally happening every year and has been happening for hundreds of years. And that about a quarter of the world's population is latently infected. Now, the reason we don't think about it quite so often is because it happens that the majority of infections are in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, as you heard about a little from Bruce today. So when you think about the kinds of technologies that you need if you want to tackle these problems, well, you need things that are deployable, that can go out in the field. You need them to be scalable so you can run them across lots of patients. You need them to be low input, and you need them to be cheap so that they can be used in all the different contexts around the world. And so once you have the design constraints, it's easy to go find incredible partners like Chris Love over at the Koch Institute in chemical engineering to take these really cool machines that look nice in our labs at MIT but could never go out to where the problem sites are, and re-engineer them into really simple technologies that accomplish the goals that we have. So we can take the same kinds of things that enable this incredible discovery and adapt it into really simple portable chips that can literally go anywhere in the world. What that does is it then puts us in a position where we can go pop on a plane and fly down to places like South Africa, and this is actually in Durban, right at the site that you heard about from Bruce Walker earlier this morning, and look at what's different between individuals that have more mild or more severe tuberculosis to find new cellular targets that we can use for therapies to improve outcomes. You don't just have to go to South Africa, you can actually start applying these sorts of things to all kinds of problems, like pediatric stunting due to malnutrition, and environmental infections like environmental enteropathy. And you find really interesting things, like in the gut right here, we're looking at the small intestine, and we're finding that there are cells that normally only show up in the stomach, arising in the small intestine and preventing absorption of nutrients. and it gives us a new idea of what we might do to counteract it. We can similarly go hop on a plane to Thailand with Sangeeta's team, who you just heard from, and go and identify new targets that we could use to try and combat specific stages of malaria infection. And what's really cool is that when you can do this flying all around the world, your students get to go, and as I heard somebody behind me say earlier, it looks like that course that Bruce teaches is really fun, and it is really fun. But you can also improve everything that we do here in Boston because you make it simpler to do things like partner with people over at the Dana-Farber to identify distinct states of pancreatic cancer and therapeutic treatment regimes that will work better for each. And so, engaging people is important, but a lot of what our roles are as educators and, in connecting with people, as you heard about from Andrew, is to really empower. And so what I like to think a lot about is how we can go out into the world inspired by models like the one you heard from Bruce Walker today and train people in these technologies so that they can apply them to their own science so that we can do more than we could do independently in our own lab. And so I've been lucky enough to go to lots of places with the team to train individuals in places like Ghana and Senegal in some of these technologies and to share what we've learned along the way so that others that are interested feel like they have at least a place to start as they begin. And another part of really empowering people is not just going out and teaching them, it's also working with the innovation ecosystem around here to take the widgets that we build, harden them, and then sell them. And I think that commercialization isn't the dirty secret, and patenting isn't the dirty secret. There are things that we do really well here. We do that 0 to 1, and sometimes that 1 to 10. But academia is a place that's hard to go sometimes from 10 to 1,000, and that's where partnerships with local biotechs, local industry, with venture firms becomes really critical to having the kinds of impact that we want to have. And most importantly, figuring out what the right targets are to accelerate good outcomes for patients. So, I think that to me, what's so powerful about being MIT is this opportunity to explore, to identify good problems. So the what are you going to do? The opportunity to engineer with incredible colleagues solutions that will work, and then to engage others in fun science, and then to empower others to do the same in their own research. And I think that this model needs to be extended to a place where we can tackle all of the emerging problems that are showing up in the world today. You heard about some of them earlier from people like Linda, issues with women's health. Unfortunately, this is probably not the last pandemic we're going to see. We need to think about children and their thriving. We have issues at the intersection of global human health and global warming that we have to work our way through, and we have places where we need to think about how to care for the elderly and deal with chronic conditions. But I think that this model that we can have here at MIT, taking advantage of this incredible ecosystems of biotechs, hospitals, and surrounding academic centers like HMS puts us in a position to actually really go after this and to have transformative impact for everybody everywhere. And so with that, I just want to thank some of our funders and some of our collaborators. There's too many to throw on the screen, but it's incredible to be in a place where this kind of cooperation and partnership is something that people love. It's not, should we do something? It's can we do it together and how? And so thank you very much.